Good morning. Welcome to Word of the Day Thursday, and our word for today is promise. It's a word that I've been thinking a lot about as we journey through this year of 2020. As tough as this year has been, it has certainly caused me to fall back on the promises of our faith as never before. And here's the thing, we people of faith are certainly people of promise. Think about the people of God that we meet in our Bible. Abraham and Sarah, a childless couple, approaching senior citizen status, when God called them and promised that they would have many descendants, as many as the stars in the sky, that they would have land and that they would be a blessing. Their faith in those promises sometimes wavered, but in time those promises were fulfilled. And then there was Moses and the Israelites. The people were slaves in Egypt for many years, but God never forgot the people, and in time kept the promise that they would be freed from slavery and have their own land. Throughout our Old Testament, we hear the promise that a Messiah would come to save the people. And with the birth of Jesus, that promise was indeed kept. The thing about God's promises is that they're always in God's time and always in God's way. Sometimes they didn't happen when the people wanted them to. Often they didn't happen the way the people expected. When Jesus walked this earth with his disciples, teaching, preaching, and healing, he made a promise to them. He told them that he would die, but would rise again on the third day. As hard as that promise must have been to believe, that promise did indeed come true. And that brings us to 2020. As we lean into the promises of our faith to see us through, perhaps we've also had time to see our world in a new way. Perhaps this year has given us a vision of what God sees when God looks at our world. First, the tragic death of so many people in our world and in our country. And then the heroic efforts made by medical personnel, even at the risk of their own lives. And finally, perhaps the most powerful thing about 2020 is that this year, in all of its upheaval and pain, has shed a light on the social injustices in our country. Most of us never clearly saw them before, but God saw, and God promised to care. God's call to feed the hungry and care for the least of these has been ignored for too long. If this year changes that, and if it changes us, we can be grateful. As we wait, we reflect on how God does indeed keep God's promises. For me, there's one promise made by God that has sustained me and filled me with hope. That's a promise that we read at the very end of St. Matthew's Gospel. Jesus' last words in that Gospel are a promise. I am with you always. As we wait for this pandemic to be over, for our lives to return to normal, we wait with the knowledge of God's promise. God's promise to love us, God's promise to be with us, and God's promise to strengthen us for the work ahead.